My mother looked at me with eyes full of hate and said, "I wish you'd never been my daughter." That was the night everything changed, but what she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that her words would set in motion a chain of events that would destroy our family's greatest enemy. And I was just getting started. My mom said, "I wish you'd never been my daughter." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the humid summer air before a storm. They didn't echo, because there was nothing for them to bounce off of. We were in the kitchen of our small house in Willow Creek, a town so quiet you could hear a pin drop 3 blocks away. The kitchen was the heart of our home, or it used to be. It was where the good smells came from, where the laughter lived, where we'd spend hours talking about nothing and everything. Now, it smelled like stale coffee and regret. The yellow wallpaper, which my mom had been so proud of, seemed to be peeling a little more each day, like the skin of an old snake. A single, harsh light bulb buzzed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that made my mom look like a stranger. She was leaning against the counter, her arms crossed over her chest, her face a mask of tired fury. I was on the other side of the room, frozen by the door, my hand still on the cool metal knob, my keys jingling softly in my grip. I had just come in from work. I was tired. It had been a long day at the accounting firm where I spent my life crunching numbers for people who had more money than they'd ever need. But my tiredness was nothing compared to the exhaustion I saw in my mother's eyes. It wasn't a physical exhaustion. It was a deep, soul-deep tiredness that had etched itself into the lines around her mouth and the permanent furrow in her brow. For the last 5 years, she had been taking care of my father. He'd had a stroke, a massive one that had robbed him of his mobility, his speech, and almost all of his dignity. He was a shell of the man who used to build birdhouses in the garage and whistle old Frank Sinatra tunes. He was a man who now needed help with everything. I mean everything. Bathing, eating, changing. It was a full-time, unforgiving, and heartbreaking job. A job my mother had taken on without a second thought. I did. I would come over on weekends and help with the heavy lifting, run errands, cook meals. But my life was in the city, an hour away. I had my own apartment, my own job, my own life. I told myself I was doing enough. I sent money every month, a substantial amount that I hoped would ease the burden. It was my way of helping without having to be there. I was good at that, I realized with a jolt of self-loathing. I was good at compartmentalizing. I was good at putting my own needs first and rationalizing it as self-preservation. I didn't want to see my father like that. It was too painful. It reminded me of my own mortality, of the fragility of life. I was a coward, and I'd been hiding behind a spreadsheet and a stack of 20s. But today, I had made a mistake. I had told her I couldn't come this weekend. I had a work thing, an important client dinner. That was the last straw. The dam she had been so carefully holding back for 5 years finally burst. "I wish you'd never been my daughter." The silence after her words was so profound I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. The buzzing of the light bulb seemed to intensify, a mocking, insect-like hum. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to laugh it off, to say something, anything, to make the world right again. But she didn't. She just stood there, breathing heavily, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. Her hands were trembling. "Mom," I finally whispered, my voice cracking. "You don't mean that." "Don't I, Natalie?" she shot back. Her voice was low, but it was sharp, like broken glass. 5 years, Natalie. 5 years of my life, I have given up everything. My friends, my garden, my book club, my health, my life has stopped. And you come here when it's convenient for you. You drop by for a few hours, bring a lasagna, and then you go back to your perfect little life. You don't see the nights I can't sleep because he's crying out in pain. You don't see the days I can't even get a shower because he needs me. You don't see me. You never see me." "That's not fair," I said, my own anger rising to meet her pain. "I work hard. I send you money. I'm trying to build a future for myself. You always told me to be independent, to stand on my own 2 feet. I'm doing what you told me to do." "Independence isn't the same as abandonment, Natalie," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "You have been so focused on your own future, you forgot you had a past. You forgot you had a family. You forgot I exist." "I didn't forget," I protested, the words feeling hollow even as I said them. "I'm here now." You're here now because I yelled at you, she spat. You're not here because you want to be. You're here because you feel guilty. I don't want your pity visits. I don't want your guilt money. I wanted my daughter. I wanted my daughter to hold my hand and tell me it was going to be okay. I wanted my daughter to be there beside me, not at the end of a phone line. I have been so alone, Natalie, so alone. Tears started to spill down her cheeks, carving tracks through the fine layer of dust and sorrow on her face. The sight of it broke something inside me. My carefully constructed defense, the wall of selfishness and self-preservation I'd built, crumbled into dust. I saw it then, I saw it all. I saw her, my beautiful, vibrant mother, reduced to this, a trembling, heartbroken woman who had been fighting a losing battle alone. And I had let her. I'm sorry, Mom, I choked out, taking a hesitant step toward her. I'm so sorry. She flinched back from me, as if my words were a physical blow. Sorry isn't enough. It's never enough. You're just like your father's family. They all disappeared when he got sick. They couldn't be bothered. All they ever cared about was themselves. You're a Sterling, through and through. The name hit me like a slap. My father's family, the Sterlings, were a cold, wealthy clan. They looked down on my mother because she came from a working-class background. They'd never approved of their son marrying a simple woman with no connections. When my father got sick, they didn't just disappear, they slammed the door in our faces. They were a constant source of pain for my mother, a reminder that she had never been good enough for their son. And now she was comparing me to them. The accusations stung more than anything she had said before. I am not like them, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by a new kind of pain. I couldn't breathe. I felt like the room was closing in on me. No, she scoffed. Then prove it. I am drowning, Natalie. I am sinking, and all you've done is stand on the shore and watch me go under. What kind of daughter does that? What kind of daughter leaves her mother to suffer alone? I had no answer. There was no good answer. Because she was right. I had left her to suffer alone. I had been so consumed by my own fear, my own discomfort, my own life, that I had become blind to the suffering of the one person who had given me everything. I looked past her at the living room, where my father's wheelchair sat in the corner. He was asleep in his hospital bed, a frail, silent figure. He didn't know the war that was raging in the kitchen. He was lost in his own silent world. I'll do better, I said, the words a desperate prayer. I'll move back. I'll help you full-time. I'll get a job here, whatever you need. She shook her head, a sad, hopeless gesture. It's too late for that, Natalie. It's too late. You made your choice 5 years ago. You chose yourself. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and turned away from me, staring out the window at the dark, empty street. I think you should go. Mom, please don't do this, I begged. Please, let me make it right. She didn't turn around, she just stared out into the darkness. There's nothing to fix. Some things are just broken. Go home, Natalie. There was a finality in her voice that terrified me. I knew that tone. It was the same tone she used when she was done arguing with a stubborn salesperson or a rude customer. It was the tone of a woman who had shut down all her emotions and was now operating on pure, cold logic. I had been dismissed. I didn't leave. I couldn't. I walked over to her, my feet feeling like they were made of lead. I stood behind her, close enough to see the slight tremor in her shoulders. I reached out and gently placed my hand on her arm. She flinched, but this time she didn't pull away. I am so sorry, Mom, I whispered again. I was crying now too. The tears were hot and heavy on my cheeks. I didn't know, I didn't see, I've been so stupid. I'm so sorry. She was silent for a long time. The only sounds were the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway and the rhythmic hum of my father's oxygen machine. It was a soundtrack of decay, a constant reminder of what we were losing. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and broken. I used to dream of what kind of mother you'd be, she said. I wanted to be a good grandmother. I wanted to see you get married. I wanted to see you happy. I wanted to be a part of your life. But you've built a wall around yourself, Natalie. You've made a world where I don't fit in. You fit in, I insisted, my voice trembling. You're my mom. You will always be a part of my life. I'm not so sure about that anymore, she said. Sometimes I feel like I don't even know you. You've become a stranger. That word cut deeper than any curse. Stranger. All this time, I had been trying to protect myself from the pain of watching my father decline, and in the process, I had become a stranger to the woman who knew me better than anyone else on earth. I had lost my way. I had lost myself. That night, I slept on the old sofa in the living room. I couldn't bear to leave. I couldn't bear to go back to my quiet, empty apartment in the city. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the last 5 years. I saw all the times I'd made excuses to cut a visit short. I remembered the clipped phone calls, the way I'd always change the subject when my mom started talking about the difficulties of the day. I remembered the weight of my own selfishness, and it crushed me. I woke up in the morning to the smell of coffee. I found my mother in the kitchen, sitting at the small table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Her eyes were red and swollen. She'd been crying all night. My father was sleeping, a peaceful expression on his face. For a moment, the house felt calm. We didn't speak. She just gestured to a cup of coffee she'd poured for me. I sat down across from her, and we drank our coffee in silence. There were no more angry words, just a profound and terrible sadness. Over the next few days, things were different. Not better exactly, but different. The wall that had been between us was gone, but in its place was a vast, empty space. We tiptoed around each other, afraid to say or do anything that might cause more pain. I stayed. I didn't go back to the city. I called my office and told them I was taking a leave of absence. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't want her to think it was a grand gesture. I just did it. I started helping. Not just with money, but with the real work. I helped my father eat breakfast. I helped her change his bed. I sat with him while she went to take a shower and actually have a moment to herself. It was harder than I ever imagined. It was heartbreaking to see the man who had taught me to ride a bike now unable to hold a spoon. It was emotionally and physically draining, but it was also healing. Every small act of kindness, every moment I spent with them, was a step toward redemption. I was finally being a daughter. One afternoon, I was helping my father into his wheelchair. He was heavier than he looked, and it was a struggle. I was straining, my muscles burning, when my mom walked in. She had been in the garden, pulling weeds, trying to find a piece of herself in the dirt. She saw me struggling and came over to help. Without a word, she grabbed his other arm, and together, we lifted him smoothly into the chair. She stood there for a moment, her hand on my father's shoulder, and then she looked at me. There were no angry words this time. Her eyes were tired, but they held a spark of something else. It was a cautious hope. She reached out and tucked a strand of stray hair behind my ear. "Thank you, Nat," she said. It was just 2 words, but they held the weight of all the 5 lost years. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was a beginning. That small moment of peace didn't last. A few days later, I was in the living room, going through old photo albums. I was trying to find a picture for a photo collage my mom wanted to make. The albums were a record of our past, a time capsule of happiness before the long, slow darkness descended. My mom was in the kitchen, preparing lunch. My father was napping peacefully. I was lost in the memories. A picture of me as a little girl holding a giant ice cream cone, a picture of my parents on their wedding day, their faces full of hope and joy, when I heard the phone ring. My mom answered it in the kitchen. I could hear her voice through the wall. The pleasantries didn't last long. I heard her voice rise, become sharp and clipped. I heard the word no repeated several times. Then a long silence, followed by a single heartbreaking sob. I was on my feet in an instant. I rushed into the kitchen just as she was setting the phone down. Her face was as white as a sheet. She looked like she was about to faint. I ran to her side. "Mom, what happened?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Who was it?" She just stared at the phone, her eyes wide with shock and horror. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. I grabbed her shoulders, trying to get her attention. "Mom, please talk to me. What's going on?" She finally looked at me, and I saw the earth-shattering devastation in her eyes. "It was the bank," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They called to say they were foreclosing on the house." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "Foreclosing? That's impossible. I've been sending you money. I made sure the mortgage was paid." My mom shook her head slowly, a dazed look on her face. "You paid the mortgage I had with the local bank," she said. "But after your father got sick, the medical bills, we were drowning. I had to take out a second mortgage." I had to get money from other places. The payments were too much. I fell behind. I thought I could get caught up. I thought I could fix it. I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want you to worry. I stared at her, dumbfounded. A second mortgage? I had no idea. All this time, I thought I was the one providing the financial support. I thought I was the one keeping the roof over their heads. But I had only been paying half the story. I had been paying for a future I'd assumed was secure, while she had been fighting a secret war against a mountain of debt on her own. Why didn't you tell me? I cried, my voice thick with frustration. I could have helped. I could have paid it off. You had your own life, your own bills, your own future, she cried back, her own frustration mirroring mine. I was trying to protect you. I didn't want to be a burden to you any more than I already was. I was so ashamed, Natalie. I felt so stupid. I kept thinking I could dig myself out, but I just kept falling deeper and deeper. The guilt I'd felt for the last 5 years was nothing compared to what I was feeling now. It wasn't just that I hadn't been there for them emotionally. I hadn't been there for them financially either, not completely. My mom had been carrying a financial burden she could never have handled alone. And I had been so busy patting myself on the back for paying the local bank's mortgage that I never noticed she was drowning in debt from others. My help had been a band-aid on a bleeding artery. How much, Mom? I asked, my voice low and urgent. How much do you owe? She told me. The number was staggering. It was a life-ruining amount of money. It was more than I had in my savings. It was more than I could ever hope to make in a year. It was an impossible, insurmountable amount. This is all my fault, my mom sobbed, sinking into a chair. I failed your father, I failed us, I lost our home, I've lost everything. I held her then. I held her as she cried, her sobs racking her frail body. The weight of her fear and her shame pressed down on me. I wasn't just a bad daughter, I was an oblivious one. I had been so focused on my own little world that I hadn't seen the massive sinkhole opening up under the only home I'd ever known. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and bank meetings. I tried everything. I talked to financial advisors. I pleaded with the bank manager. I scrounged together every penny I had, but it wasn't enough. The loan sharks and banks my mom had gone to were ruthless. They didn't care about our sob story. They wanted their money. We had a deadline, which was just 2 weeks away. If we couldn't come up with the entire amount by then, we were out on the street. I was desperate. I had no one to turn to. The only people I could think of who had that kind of money, who could write a check for that amount without blinking, were the Sterlings. My father's family. The cold, wealthy clan who had turned their backs on him when he became sick. The people my mother hated with a passion. The same people my mother had just compared me to a few weeks ago. Going to them for help felt like the ultimate betrayal. It felt like admitting defeat. It felt like walking into the lion's den dressed in a steak suit. But I had no choice. I couldn't let my parents become homeless. I didn't tell my mom what I was planning. I knew she would be furious. I knew she would refuse. This was a secret I had to keep. I looked up my grandmother's number. I hadn't spoken to her in years. My calls were always screened and never returned. It was a cold, formal relationship that had been maintained out of a bizarre sense of obligation, not love. I dialed the number, my hands shaking. The voice that answered on the other end was clipped and professional. It was a secretary. "This is Natalie Sterling," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady. "I need to speak with my grandmother, Alina Sterling. It's urgent." There was a pause, and then the secretary said, "1 moment, please." The silence on the phone line was agonizing. I imagined the secretary walking through the vast, cold hallways of my grandmother's mansion, the click of her heels echoing on the marble floors. I imagined my grandmother sitting in her drawing room, a glass of sherry in her hand, her face set in a perpetual look of disdain. Finally, a voice came on the line, cool and detached. "Natalie, this is a surprise." It was my grandmother. She didn't sound happy to hear from me. She sounded suspicious. "Grandmother," I said, my throat tight, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need your help. It's about my father." "What about him?" she asked, her tone revealing no emotion. "Has something happened?" "No, he's fine as he can be," I said, stumbling over the words. "But we're in trouble. We're losing the house. My mom took out a lot of loans to pay for his medical care, and we're about to be foreclosed on. We need a lot of money, and I don't have anywhere else to turn. Please, grandmother, I'm begging you, please help us. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear my grandmother's brain working, calculating the situation. She was a master strategist. She never did anything without a reason. I find your request quite rich, Natalie, she finally said, her voice dripping with disdain. You have ignored this family for years. You've chosen to be a part of that woman's world, a world we have never approved of. And now, when you're in trouble, you come crawling back, expecting us to write a check. It's not for me, I said, my voice pleading. It's for my father, your son. He's dying, grandmother. We're losing his home, the only home he's ever had. How can you turn your back on him again? We have not turned our backs on him, she said, her voice sharp. He turned his back on us when he married that woman. He made his choices. He chose to be a simple man with a simple life. He wanted no part of our world. Why should we be expected to bail him out now, just because he made a series of terrible decisions? Because he's your son, I cried, losing all my composure. He's your flesh and blood, and you have the money. You could save him without even noticing the loss. What is the point of having all that money if you can't use it to help your own family? It's not my job to save people from their own poor choices, she said, her voice like ice. The Sterlings are strong. We stand on our own 2 feet. We don't beg, we don't whine. We don't make foolish mistakes and then expect others to clean them up. That little melodrama you're engaged in with your mother is of your own making. You've chosen her side. Now you must live with the consequences. So you'll just let them lose their house, I said, tears of frustration welling in my eyes. You'll just let them become homeless. They will not be homeless, she said, her tone dismissive. I'm sure there is some public assistance they can get, or perhaps they can move into a small apartment. It's what their station in life dictates, after all. I'm sorry you wasted your time with this call, Natalie. I cannot help you. Goodbye. She hung up. I was left listening to the dial tone, the finality of her words echoing in my ears. I stood there in the phone booth, the receiver in my hand, feeling more alone and powerless than ever. The humiliation and the anger churned inside me. I wasn't just a failed daughter anymore. I was a failure at everything. When I got home, I told my mom everything. I told her about the phone call. I told her about the bank's ultimatum. I told her about my grandmother's refusal. I expected her to be furious. I expected her to lash out at me, but she didn't. She just sat there in silence, staring at the wall, her face a blank mask of resignation. The spirit had gone out of her. The fight was over. It's okay, Natalie, she said, her voice empty. I never expected anything from them. I just thought, maybe I hoped they'd have a shred of humanity. But I was wrong. It's the curse of our family. The Sterlings have no hearts. I felt my own heart harden. The rejection was a physical blow. I had been so desperate, I had humiliated myself, I had swallowed every ounce of my pride, all for nothing. They had looked at me, at my father, at my mother, and they had seen nothing but trash. My anger, which had been simmering for days, suddenly roared to life. It was a hot, righteous fury. They didn't just refuse us, they rejected us. They made us feel small. They made us feel worthless. They made us feel like we didn't deserve to exist. I spent the next few days in a state of agitation. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. My mind was racing, trying to find a solution. But every possibility I came up with hit a dead end. We were out of time, and we were out of options. The house was going to be lost. It was a sure thing. One night, I was lying on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of despair and anger. My mom was in her room, having a rare night of sleep. My father was in the other room, plugged into his machine, his breath shallow and labored. The house was quiet, but my head was anything but. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. We stand on our own 2 feet. It was a mantra for the privileged, a philosophy for the powerful who had never known what it was like to struggle. It was the creed of the heartless. I thought about the months of my mother's suffering, the years of silence, the abandonment, the final, cold dismissal on the phone. They had treated us like we were nothing. Like my father's entire life, his entire existence was just a mistake to be corrected. And the worst part was, they could save us. They could fix everything with a snap of their fingers. They just refused to. My eyes drifted to the small desk in the corner of the room. It was my mother's writing desk, a beautiful antique piece that had been in her family for generations. I got up and walked over to it. I don't know why, I was just restless. I started opening the drawers, looking through the old papers, the bills, the letters. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just looking for something. In the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of old tax returns, I found a thick manila envelope. It was old and faded, the corners dog-eared. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was just a plain envelope. I pulled it out. It was surprisingly heavy. I opened it, my fingers trembling with a strange anticipation. Inside, I found a stack of old letters and documents. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. They were letters from an old law firm, dated decades ago. I started reading them. It was a legal correspondence. The letters were about a trust fund that had been set up by my great-grandfather. The letters talked about provisions, beneficiaries, and conditions. My father's name was all over them. It was an inheritance. A huge inheritance that had been left to my father. My grandmother and her family had been the trustees. My heart started to beat faster. I remembered the stories my mother used to tell me about her father-in-law, my great-grandfather. He was a self-made man, a titan of industry who had built the Sterling Empire from scratch. My mom said he had a soft spot for my father, his youngest son. He thought my grandmother was a cold, harsh woman who had turned the family against him. The stories said he had planned to leave everything to my father, to give him a way out from under his mother's oppressive thumb. But then he died suddenly. He died before the papers were finalized. I had always thought that was just a family legend, a bit of wishful thinking from my mom. But now I was holding the proof in my hands. The trust fund existed. My great-grandfather had left my father a fortune. But the trustees, my grandmother and her cronies, had never acted on it. They had suppressed the documents. They had hidden the existence of the trust. They had stolen my father's inheritance. The pieces of the puzzle started to click into place with a sickening feeling. The timing of my grandmother's refusal to help us now made sense. It wasn't just a lack of generosity. It was self-preservation. If I had delved too deeply into the family finances, if I had demanded to know where the money was going, I might have uncovered this secret. She wasn't just protecting her money. She was protecting a crime. She had embezzled from her own son. I sat down on the sofa, the papers trembling in my hands. My mind was reeling. I wasn't just dealing with a cruel grandmother. I was dealing with a monster. She had stolen my father's future. She had condemned him to a life of hardship and struggle, all so she could keep the money for herself and her other, more worthy children. All the suffering, all the pain, all the sleepless nights my mother had endured, it could have been avoided. My father could have had the best doctors in the world. My mother could have had help. I could have had a different, easier life. All of it had been stolen from us by my grandmother's greed. The anger that had been burning inside me for days was no longer a vague, hot feeling. It was a cold, sharp, and focused rage. My grandmother wasn't just a person who didn't want to help. She was a thief. She was a fraud. And I was going to destroy her. That night, I didn't sleep. I went through every single document in that envelope. I made copies of everything. I made notes. I built a case. I knew I needed a lawyer, a good one, someone who wasn't afraid to go up against the Sterling family's money and power. I didn't have any money for a lawyer, but I had something better. I had the truth. I had the proof of a crime. The next morning, I sat my mother down in the kitchen. I told her everything. At first, she didn't believe me. She thought I was just a desperate girl clutching at straws. But when I showed her the documents, the old letters, the legal jargon she didn't quite understand but felt was important, the change in her was immediate. The weight of the world, the years of exhaustion and guilt, suddenly shifted. The despair in her eyes was replaced by something I hadn't seen in 5 years. It was anger. It was fire. It was hope. "They stole from us," she said, her voice a low, fierce growl. "All this time, they stole from your father." "I'm going to make them pay," I said. "I'm going to get it all back, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what they did. I'm going to destroy them, Mom. I'm going to take everything from them, just like they tried to take everything from us." My mom looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, she looked proud. "You're a Sterling, Natalie," she said. But you're not like them. You're better. You're a sterling who actually stands up for her family. I found a lawyer who was willing to take the case on a contingency basis. He was a young man, not yet jaded by the world, and he was hungry for a big case. The Sterlings were a prime target, and he knew it. The case was a slam dunk. The documents were clear. The evidence was undeniable. It was a story of greed, fraud, and betrayal. I spent the next few weeks in a whirlwind. I gave depositions. I testified. I watched my grandmother and my family members squirm as the truth came out. The town of Willow Creek, which had always whispered about the mysterious Sterlings, was suddenly captivated by the drama. The local paper ran headlines about the Willow Creek daughter takes on billionaire family. The story went national. It was a classic David and Goliath story, and the public was on my side. The day of the final settlement arrived. The courtroom was packed. It was a circus. My grandmother sat in the defendant's seat, her face a mask of stone. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge my existence. My mother and father, who was in a wheelchair and had to be brought in on a special lift, sat in the front row. My father was barely conscious, but he was there. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to see justice being done. The judge's ruling was swift and devastating for the Sterlings. He found my grandmother and the other trustees guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. He ordered them to pay back the entire trust fund, with interest, plus legal fees and massive punitive damages. The final amount was astronomical. It was more money than I could ever comprehend. The Sterlings were ruined. They hadn't just lost the money they'd stolen. They'd lost almost everything else, too. After the trial, my mother and I took my father home. The house was no longer in foreclosure. The money from the settlement was enough to pay off the debt and to buy my parents a comfortable, secure future. My mother hired a full-time nurse to care for my father, and for the first time in 5 years, she could finally rest. She could have a life again. One evening, a few weeks after the trial, we were sitting in the living room. The house felt different now. It was lighter, cleaner. There was a warmth and a peace that had been missing for so long. The windows were open, letting in the sweet scent of the garden my mother had started to tend to again. My father was in his chair, asleep, a small smile on his face. For the first time in 5 years, his face didn't look like it was etched in pain. He looked peaceful. My mom was sitting on the sofa, sipping a cup of tea. I was on the floor, leaning against her legs, just like I used to do when I was a little girl. She reached down and stroked my hair. "I have to tell you something," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know you don't want to hear it, but I need to say it. I need you to know that I love you, and I'm sorry for everything." My mom smiled, a real, beautiful smile that reached her eyes. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice soft. "You don't have to be sorry. Look at what you did. You saved us. You saved our family. You were the daughter I always knew you could be." I shook my head. "No, Mom, I wasn't. I was so selfish for so long. I almost lost you. I almost lost everything." "We all make mistakes, Natalie," she said, pulling me into a hug. "The important thing is that we learn from them. You did more than just learn. You grew. You became the person you were always meant to be. A strong, smart, brave woman." "But the things you said that night in the kitchen," I whispered, the memory still painful. "You said you wished I'd never been your daughter." She was silent for a moment. I thought I had made a mistake by bringing it up. But then, she pulled me closer. "I was angry, Natalie," she said, her voice full of regret. "I was so tired. I was so hurt. I was lashing out. When you're in that much pain, you say things you don't mean. The person who said that wasn't your real mother. She was a ghost, a shadow of who I really am. I was wrong. So wrong. The day you were born, Natalie, was the best day of my life. You are the best thing I ever did. You are the best part of me, and I am so, so proud of you." I felt the tears streaming down my cheeks. My mom held me, rocking me gently, as if I was a little girl again. The weight of the past 5 years, the guilt, the anger, the fear, it all melted away in that hug. The healing had finally begun. "I love you, Mom," I whispered into her shoulder. "I love you too, sweetheart," she said. "I love you more than anything."